الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. اللهم لعن وانتقم الذين يقاتلون أولياءك في غزة ويقتلون الأبرياء والأطفال والنساء. اللهم شتت شملهم ودمر ديارهم وخرب بيوتهم وانزل بهم بأسك الذي لا ترد عن القوم المجرمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة وانصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي سائر بلدان المسلمين. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأصحابه وذريته أجمعين. Okay, I think we were discussing somewhere here. Let's see. So let's start. I think I'll just read from here, so just to remind ourselves what we did the last time, and if we want to add anything, more to add as well. Now there's one philosopher who has denied that a political society or a state, or at least a well-ordered democratic society, can be a community. According to John Rawls, such a society is neither an association nor a community. A community, he argues, a society governed by a shared comprehensive religious, philosophical, or moral doctrine. So that's his definition of community. So for Rawls, community by definition requires some sort of a shared comprehensive doctrine, religious or philosophical or moral. Once we recognize the fact of pluralism, by which he means in modern society there are more than one competing comprehensive worldviews, Rawls maintains we must abandon hope of political community unless we are prepared to countenance the oppressive use of state power to secure it. However, no, this view rests on a very narrow understanding of community. I mean, community is not something objective in the sense that, if you are defining something by definition, I mean, if you are considering some concepts as referring to something by definition, then, I mean, as far as definition is concerned, there's no debate, as long as you stick to your definition. So I don't know what he's going to do. So it would make it community as a collective. However, this view rests on a very narrow understanding of community as a collectivity united in affirming the same comprehensive doctrine. And I made some comments last time on this. It would make it impossible to recognize as communities a range of collective community regarded as communities, including neighbor. Regarded as communities by whom? Because the question is whether, say here, Rawls is rejecting a concept of community based on his definition of community. So if you don't accept his definition, or you don't go by his definition, then there's no point in arguing with him unless you are just merely differentiating your view from his view. That's what I'm saying. While some common understanding is undoubtedly necessary, it is too much. What is too much? It's like, people say too many civilians are being died. So how many are too many? So how much is too much? So this is not a very precise language. So necessary, it is too much to ask community to share such a comprehensive. On a broader understanding of community, a state can be a political. However, it should be noted that on this account, political community is much less substantial. So that's by definition you are excluding the things then many might argue. So it is no more than a partial community, being only one of many to which individuals must. So people can belong to many communities. So then he would find it hard to differentiate community from society, but that's another question. Okay. So we had, I think, covered this much. So let's today start from here. Okay, so though a state may be a political community, it need not be. Strange. Yet it must always be an association. So, okay. So there are states which are associations in the sense that they have agency, but they are not political community because they are not based on some sort of a shared understanding which differentiates between public and private, and they are not based on shared interests and understanding. So it's strange. What usually gives expression to the capacity that that capacity agency is the state's government, not just government. I mean, police is not part of government, army is not part of government, bureaucracy is not part of government. Obviously they are supposedly subservient to government, but they are always there, even when the government's transitions in. So, I mean, they are government too, but they are permanent government. So there's two types of governments. Government and states are not, however, the same things. Okay, I think I agree with that, but what's the difference? Let's see. That would be interesting, because this distinction between government and state is recent, in the sense that its prominence is recent, because traditionally the distance between government and state hasn't been that deep. So that makes some people think that state and government and their distinction as a fact is a recent thing, which is not. So state can exist without governments, and frequently exists without many. Not all governments have states. Governments have states. Australia, for example, has one federal government, 6 state governments, 2 territorial governments, and numerous local governments. Yeah, but that's the cheating, because one state is always there. The United States, Canada, Germany, Malaysia, and India are just a few examples of many countries with many governments. That doesn't. I mean, you can talk about government of household too. So, but I won't quibble with him, because at the moment it's not really clear where he is going with this. Malaysian, states that have, now he hasn't even he said that a state is not the same thing as government, but he hasn't made the distinction clear yet. What is the distinction based on? So I'm just assuming a state have for at least a time operated without government, or at least a central government, or at least. That's again including Somalia from Iraq and Japan from when the post-war Allied occupation came to an end. Many governments are clearly governments of units within federal state, but there can also be governments where there are no states. A personal authority is one. Well, that's work within Israeli state. So if they are basically wings of Israeli government, Israeli state, and that's how they act. They're policemen for Israel. Everybody knows that. So this is a bad example. I think government is an entity whose existence precedes that of a state. Proceed conceptually or temporally or both. Government is an institution. State is also an institution. A government is a person or group of persons who rule or administer or govern a political or a state. For government to come into being, there must exist a public. The ruling within a household is not government. Why not? Well, ancient authors talk about it. So I think Aristotle talked about household government. Government exists when people accept willingly or not the authority of some person. So government is only a legitimate form of use of force. So a person address matters of public concern. The provision of non-excludable goods, the administration of justice and defense against external enmity being typical example of such matters. Until the emergence of the state, when did it emerge? Government did not attend to the interests of a corporate entity, but administered the affair of less clearly defined or demarcated publics. This is not clear. Until the emergence of the government did not attend to the interests of a corporate entity, but administered the affairs of less clearly defined or demarcated publics. With the advent, however, government became the established administrative element of corporate entity. Let's see what I think we did look at corporate entity, but I need to. The question now is, what does it mean to say that a state is a corporate entity? The state is corporation in the way that people or a public cannot be. It is a corporation because it is in effect and in fact a legal person. State is a legal person. Government is not a legal person. As a legal person, a corporation not only has capacity to act but also has a liability to be held responsible. So has government. Furthermore, a corporation is able to hold property. Government is not. This is true for incorporated commercial enterprise, for institutional organizations, and for state. Why it's not true for government? Corporation cannot without natural persons who comprise it. And there must be, so does the government, and there must be more than one, for a single cannot be corporation. But it can be a person. But the corporation is also a person separate from the person who comprise it. So is a society, for example. Thus, a public company has existence because of its shareholders, its agents and employees, but its rights and duties and power and liability are not reducible to or definable in terms of those natural persons. I think you can say same of society too. A church or a university has an existence because of the officer who run them and members who give them their point. But the property of such an entity does not belong to any of those individuals. Okay, but it can belong to. The state is a corporation in the same way that other entities are. So it is a legal person, a state. So why can't be government a legal person? I don't. The question in political theory has always been on not whether such an entity can come into existence, since it but how it does it, like state. This is in part a question of whether its existence is legitimate. A question of genealogy, at least in principle, should be. The state, however, is not the only possible. I think we'll stop here, and I'll just go through it again and see if we got anything out of it, out of this. And then I want to do it bit by bit so we can focus on what he's saying. So he was arguing with Rawls that he was trying to reject Rawls's claim that a state cannot be a political community. He said that it can be but need not be. But a state is always an association, because state has agency. So if a state has an agency, then only association for him has agency. And political communities which are not association and societies which are not association don't have agency, so they can't be state. But what about the government? Okay, so that's the first thing he said. And the second thing he says is that since a state is the agency, and the second thing or third thing he claims is that what usually gives agency to state or expresses the agency of the state is its government. Okay, so what expresses? But he goes on to say that state and governments are not same things, which means that there can be a government without a state. That's what he says. And for him, governments have always existed, it seemed like, for him, but the state emerged at a specific time. And examples he gives are not very consistent. First example he gives is of, local governments and provincial governments, but they are obviously not without a state, because there is always a federal state. But more plausible examples are of Somalia and Iraq. They had states apparently, but not they were governments but not states. Not very clear how, because probably we can say they were defunct state, but if there is some sort of government at that level, there must be some state as well. But his example of Palestinian Authority is very, I think, bogus, because Palestinian Authority is basically not even a government, it's a police force acting on behalf of a state called Israel. So it can't exist without this state and its sanctions. So that's not a good example. But what is the distinction between government and state? So his important claim is that government is an institution whose existence precedes the states. That will depend on your definition. I mean, you can exclude by definition anything you want, but I don't know what's the purpose of that. So it is important for him to make a plausible distinction between government and state. And he sort of started doing that. And what is the main distinction? Let's go through it. So here he says that government is what rules a state. And what defines government is when people accept the authority of persons to address matters of public concerns. So that's when government exists. So he thinks that on that basis, he said the household is not a government. I mean, people even talk about government of self, for example, Foucault and all those sort of stuff. So for him, government of self is not a government as well, because you have to have public. So what's the distinction between government and state then? So state presupposes a specific conception of public. So government arises when there is a public or public concern, and government rules or administer those concerns. But but these are less well-defined publics according to him. So when public becomes more well-defined, when it becomes a corporate entity, when public becomes a legal person, so to speak. So when public become a legal person, corporate entity, a legal person, meaning when public become rights and duties and liabilities, then you have a state. But I just wonder why government can't be considered a legal person, because clearly governments have rights and duties and liabilities and all those things which he. So as far as, I mean, so far it doesn't seem to me very persuasive, but I will let him speak until the end, and then we'll come back. Let me see if there's anything we missed so far. But then he goes on to say that, and then he talks about why state is a corporation and in what sense. And then he goes on to say, not all political corporations are states. So then he will distinguish between political corporations, which obviously for him government is not a political corporation, or maybe for him government can be a political corporation but not a state. So we'll see that in the next session, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Let me see where we will start next time, so we remember that. So he said the state is not, however, the only possible political corporation. So we'll start from here, inshallah, next time. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وسلم على محمد عبدك ورسولك وخليلك وصفيك ووليك سيدنا مولانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك.